Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Betting Life Show, brought to you by Fantasy Life. I'm Matthew Freedman, Matt F. the Oracle. The Stanley Cup Finals are set. We have the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers. And here with me to break down the series is Geoff Ulrich, aka the Fantasy Grind. Geoff, you are basically living your best hockey life right now. You dispatched, well, not you, but your team dispatched with James Lynch's team, James, our producer, and then dispatched with my team, the Stars. Now your team is just 4 wins away from winning the coveted Stanley Cup. How are you feeling right now?
I mean, I'm basically the Grim Reaper meme, right? Just knocking on doors, just taking souls as I go. Is there anyone that works in our company that lives in Miami? I don't know. I'm going to find out today, though. And now I'm coming for you if you do. I'm feeling great, man. I did not expect to be in this position at the start of the NHL playoffs. It's been a really fun season, like doing the previews and betting on Betting Life and the newsletter and on Fantasy Life. We're doing previews, but I didn't really expect it to be able to have my home team in the finals this year. That's how low expectations I have after 15 plus years of like non-playoffs and to terrible teams. But we're here. I think we have an awesome matchup for the finals. And it's not just because the Oilers are in there. The Oilers are a very fun team. I think people realize that now. But the Panthers are deep. They got speed. They're a fun team too. I like the Panthers. So this is going to be a great series. I think this is a great matchup. Real pumped to get it going.
Well, we will see how much you actually like the Panthers after they beat your Oilers in the Stanley Cup Finals. But of course, I'm just talking trash. I don't know. I obviously have no idea what's going to happen, but that's why I'm talking to you. Let's start talking about the Panthers first, and then we will get to your Oilers. Talk to me about the strengths and the weaknesses of this team.
I mean, I think the Panthers are a team where, like, if you're talking about weaknesses, you're talking about a pretty small basket of downside that they have. Like they're the pockets of weaknesses on the Panthers are just, they're not very big. Well, we can start there. I mean, I think Sergei Bobrovsky is someone who, people probably looking at the series, they give the edge in goal to the Panthers because Stuart Skinner's been so up and down and he's had those terrible games, and Bobrovsky's been pretty solid. But yeah, I would put a little bit of caution there in net for the Panthers. Bobrovsky is the older goalie as well. He did start the series slow. He didn't really have that great a regular season. So I start there that if the Oilers do win this series and the Panthers kind of fold, it's probably going to be partially because the Panthers just don't get the high end goaltending that perhaps we've seen in other parts of the playoffs. I'm not necessarily saying Bobrovsky won't show up in this series, but certainly I could see the Panthers goaltenders underperforming versus the Oilers. So that's one area. I also question just the upside of their blue line a little bit. They have a deep blue line, but they don't really have what you'd call like a true like shutdown defender or necessarily even like a true top pairing, at least in my opinion. They're deep, but when you're facing like the two top offensive players in the league, or two of the top 5, we'll say, that may get tested a little bit. So that's probably the areas for Florida that I'm looking at. I also think that they're a deep team. They're really good at controlling play, but what we've seen in the playoffs at points too, and this is why their series has gone 6 games, is that their offense can go a little cold at times. They're not great on the power play. Their shooting percentage can really dip, and they've had dips in offensive production during the season. So very deep team. Great at controlling the puck. That's their strength. Absolutely. They can carry the play 5-on-5 for days. They could absolutely come over and even overwhelm a team like the Oilers, who are really good 5-on-5 too. That's the strength of their team. They're going to lean on that offensive depth. They're going to lean on the depth of their blue line. But there are little pockets of weaknesses. Like I said, I don't think that they have the top end players. I think the Oilers have the best defensemen. I think the Oilers have the best 2 forwards in this series. So really, really deep team. Don't have the top end talent. A little bit of question marks in net, but overall, just a very, very good team whose depth has shone through at pretty much every series so far.
All right. Obviously, I am much more of a football person than a hockey person. And, coming from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I tend to think of everything in terms of the Cowboys. So, if you ask me to talk about the Cowboys, it could be very easy for me to enumerate their weaknesses, and maybe I would gloss over their strengths. knowing that you are a bit of a homer, I want to ask you, when looking at the Oilers, obviously talk to us about their strengths. They're a great team. That's why they're in this position, but also really focus on the weaknesses and let me know what the holes are in this roster.
So, I mean, I think the holes in the roster, and again, I mean, like we're talking about the two best teams in the league right now. Both of these teams, expected goal for percentage, they're right up there. The Oilers led in that category, XGF percentage in the regular season. The Panthers are top in the playoffs. The Oilers are a good 5-on-5 team too. What I'd say is they're not as deep as the Panthers there. And sometimes, and as we saw in game 6, they will sort of play situationally where they'll sit back, they get a lead, and we've seen it in the playoffs. It's kind of burned them a little bit. So they're not necessarily as deep. They don't necessarily carry the play as often as the Panthers do. It's probably just a weakness of their team. At the same time, like they're a very good situational team in that they did shut down the Stars, even though they allowed a million shots on net in that game 6. So they're very, very good special teams. It's probably their biggest strength, and that's where they definitely have an edge in this series. The best power play in the league. Their power play percentage in the playoffs is far and above what the Panthers have been able to produce, and their penalty kill, I think they're perfect over their last 30 penalty kills or something. They have the best penalty kill as well. So it's going to be hard for the Panthers necessarily to gain an edge there. And I think where the Panthers may struggle with the Oilers is that the Oilers are just a faster team than the Rangers. They're just better 5-on-5. So the Oilers have a lot of strengths. I would say that they're not quite as deep as the Panthers, though, and that's going to give them a little bit of problems 5-on-5. I think just in terms of like real specific weaknesses, their defense is a little bit more top heavy. Ekholm is an extremely good defender. Bouchard is just an amazing offensive force. But when you get deeper down, we've seen mistakes. We've seen Darnell Nurse make mistakes, although he finished off the Stars series extremely well. Their bottom end pairing doesn't really do much from creating chances or anything like that. They're good at blocking shots. They're situationally good, but they don't have that depth that the Panthers do, where they could throw like Ekman Larson on the power play or something like that. Just doesn't really exist for Edmonton. So they do have an X factor though with Philip Broberg, who they called up. So that could play something in the series, something to look out for as well. But I would just classify the Oilers as a team that isn't as good defensively. They're going to give up a few more chances. They have a question mark in net with Stuart Skinner, who, in my opinion, probably brings more upside than Bobrovsky, but definitely is also more prone to giving up just those terrible games. I would just characterize the Oilers as a more up and down team. Their defense is potentially going to get exposed a little bit in spots, but they also have like really high end players on that defense, like Bouchard, who can kind of make up for it. So, if you're talking about it in terms of like a football or even like a golf scenario, let's say, the Oilers are the classic, like, I'm going to make a couple bogeys, but I'm also going to make 5 birdies, or I'm going to give up 3 touchdowns, but I'm going to score 4 touchdowns. That's kind of the team they are. They're situational. If it's a shootout, the Oilers will create chances in a flash. They're great at doing that. They led the league in high danger scoring chances, but they'll also give up more chances than the Panthers. So that's just the team they are. They're more up and down than the Panthers, I would say. But offensively, I would say that they definitely have the edge. They're going to create more chances in this series, in my opinion.
All right. So thinking about how these teams match up, let's start with the Panthers offense going against the Oilers defense. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah. So, when you're looking at the Panthers, I mean, they're such a deep series. They need, in my opinion, like, their top line is going to match up with the McDavid line, and Barkov is a great player, and they've got Verhaeghe up there as well. Sam Reinhart is going to be pivotal. At the same time, like, those guys don't necessarily match up to McDavid and Draisaitl. So for me, when you're looking at the Panthers offense taking on the Oilers defense, I really think they're going to need their kind of bottom 6 players, kind of even like bottom 9 players to really produce. Like, I think like a guy like Evan Rodriguez, they might need to have a big series. Tarasenko. I think they're going to need those guys to shoot well, to really take advantage of the Oilers sort of, bottom 2 defensive pairings. That's kind of how I look at this series. I think that the Oilers, depth on the top of their lines is going to give the Panthers some problems. It's not necessarily going to shut down the chances for Barkov and guys like Reinhart, but I really think the X factor for the Panthers can be their depth. So Just looking at the Panthers versus the Oilers defense, I think that's going to be a pivotal place. Can the Oilers defensive, issues, can their bottom four defensemen hold up and limit the opportunities for the Panthers' depth? Because if they do, the Panthers don't have the same kind of power play strength that the Oilers do. So really think that's going to be pivotal for the Panthers to get those depth goals. If they do, that's going to give them the lead. That's going to give them more opportunity to kind of, carry the play a little bit more as well. So I think for the Panthers, that's going to be very critical. If they can break through on the Oilers penalty kill too, that could be an issue. They do have high end scorers. So their top line is I would say the one area where the Panthers could give the Oilers more problems than the Stars too is just, that power play that they have, Barkov, Reinhart, Tkachuk. I think it's an improvement over what Dallas was throwing at the Oilers, even though Dallas had a lot of high-end scorers as well. If the Panthers Stars do show up and sort of, take control of the series on the power play, it could be a short series for the Oilers. But I think that the main thing here is if that depth matchup goes the way of the Panthers, they'll be in a good spot.
All right. And what about the flip side of this? You have the Oilers offense going against the Panthers defense. How do you see that?
So again, I mean, I think that where the Oilers will give, the Panthers more problems is that, they're playing against the Rangers, good power play, didn't quite have the high end talent that the Oilers do though. I mean, Chris Kreider almost getting shut down for the entire series. They kept the lid on, Zibanejad pretty good. Alexei Lafreniere was kind of the one bright spot. He's got a lot of just sort of what I'd call like one-off talent where he can create shots on his own, create chances on his own. But, he's still not Leon Draisaitl or Connor McDavid. And I just think those guys are going to be at another level. So you also throw in like a guy like Evan Bouchard again. I think that this is just going to be a good matchup for the Oilers' top end players going up against not only the Panthers defense, who in my opinion don't kind of have the top end talent that maybe Dallas did in their top pairings, but also just looking at like a guy like Draisaitl potentially matching up against like Sam Bennett on the second line. I think that's going to be really critical. I think that the Oilers' second line in particular could be just a huge X factor for them. I like that matchup, Draisaitl versus Bennett, if that's a matchup we get. The Panthers aren't super deep after Barkov down the middle. And I think Leon Draisaitl kind of had a quieter series against Dallas, but now gets some rest, potentially was playing a little injured. I think that's going to be critical. The Oilers' top two lines, they're more top heavy than the Panthers. And I think that Draisaitl could really just carry the play there. So really like that matchup. I think that's going to be a big matchup for the Oilers. If they can get some second line scoring, they get the power play going. I think that's where they'll be able to carry the play.
All right. This is related to what you just talked about, but I tend to think so different sports, like basketball, for instance, we also have the NBA playoffs going on right now. My Mavericks in the finals, by the way, just shout out Mavericks. Like if you think of someone like Luka Doncic, where you have one guy who, he's only one of 10 players on the court at a time, but he can dominate the ball in such a way and get to the rim so easily. And then really also like make a shot from, almost anywhere that it's easy for one guy basically to take over the game in a sport like basketball. It feels like it's much harder for one guy to take over the game in a sport like hockey. That said, it feels like the Oilers with Connor McDavid definitely have someone who, at least at points, can basically just take over a game. And, if he gets a goal, it feels like that can be the difference between, a team winning and losing. Can you talk just a little bit about Connor McDavid and like what I would say is like that extra potential that the Oilers have of like, if this one guy goes into God mode, if this one guy plays as well as he can, like that is the difference in this series.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you bring that up because I mean, one note I made about this series is that I typically am not used to breaking down hockey like this. As you mentioned, like hockey doesn't tend to be a sport where we say, oh, well, we have this X factor or there's this one player who can just completely change the game. It's more of a team game. Like we're always looking at sort of team stats, 5-on-5, special teams, things like that. It's rare that we get a chance to say, okay, this player is playing, like he can absolutely change the game. But the Oilers kind of almost have two players like that with Draisaitl and McDavid. And I think that is that is kind of what has potentially given people problems handicapping the Oilers. Like, in my opinion, I was a little bit surprised to see them as, kind of bigger underdogs versus the Stars. I just don't think that, when you're looking at team stats, that necessarily you're factoring in the McDavid factor enough, and just the fact that he's going to create chances on his own, that the Oilers, despite getting outshot or outworked or whatever, can create chances so fast. And they have all year. Like I said, they're the league leaders in high danger chances. They had over 100 more high danger chances than the next team in the regular season. That's part and parcel because of Connor McDavid, because he's so good at creating on his own. I really don't think that we've necessarily seen that baked into lines enough. So it is something with hockey where we're always looking at team stats. We're always looking at, like 5-on-5 and stuff like that. But I think in this series particular, again, you have to factor in Connor McDavid and Draisaitl, and the fact that the Panthers just don't have that same kind of upside. So yeah, absolutely looking, kind of at the Oilers as a team that could just outperform from the fact that Connor McDavid could just take over the series at some point.
All right. Well, let's think a little bit about how you might want to bet this series. So the Oilers have the best player, obviously in the series, maybe the best player in the league. But they are underdogs in this spot. Looking at game one, they're plus 114 on the money line. The Panthers minus 135 at home. And then, of course, if you're also just looking at the playoffs, the Panthers minus 130 to win the series, the Oilers plus 110. Of course, there are lots of ways that you could approach this series from the betting perspective. What is it that you see in the betting market that stands out?
Yeah. So, excuse me. Again, I mean, look, we're getting a championship series here. It's like the Super Bowl of hockey. Obviously, these are really efficient lines. I mean, that's the first thing I'd say. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like there's a huge edge on either side. I've seen a lot of sharp people suggest that, it's probably around 54% for the Florida Panthers to win. And again, like I'm not going to sit here and argue that. I think that when you're making projections and you're looking at hockey, like I said, really kind of projecting the whole team, which again, I'm used to doing as well, that you kind of come out with the Florida Panthers having a small edge, which is where we're sitting right now. So the lines look efficient. At the same time, like, I mean, I'm obviously someone who's a little bit biased, but there's no chance I'm not betting Connor McDavid as an underdog in this series. I mean, we've seen him do it already against the team in Dallas, who I think sets up kind of similar to what the Panthers are seeing. It's going to be a more back and forth series. It's not going to be a team like Vancouver, who really tried to play shutdown, and in my opinion, had the right approach against the Oilers. They just didn't have the top end talent to kind of pull off the upset. I think that the Panthers are going to do a lot of what Dallas did, and I think that the Oilers are going to get their chances because of it. So I see this as a more wide open series, and I see this as the Oilers as an underdog. I'm willing to take that. I would just play for the Connor McDavid X factor. I think that the Oilers have a little bit more upside in net than people are necessarily giving them credit for as well. They've even got a backup who's played. So if Skinner does just nuke this team for a game or two, they could turn to Calvin Pickard. So I think that when you're looking at the X factors, they kind of just all lean to Edmonton to me. They have the best top players. They have a goalie who is younger and potentially just more capable of throwing in a shutout or two. And that, to me, they have the better power play that could get hot. That, to me, just has everything leaning towards taking the Oilers as an underdog. I really like that bet for the series. And I think that, as we're extending into more bets here, just looking at the Conn Smythe Trophy, I know we talked about this in our second round preview, Freedman, but like Connor McDavid is plus 220 to win the Conn Smythe. It's really between McDavid and Draisaitl. Draisaitl's now all the way up to plus 950. If I was betting just today and I didn't have any exposure, and I already did grab a piece of McDavid at plus 700, and I put it in our Fantasy Life bet tracker, by the way, which you can bookmark and tag and should for NFL season, for the rest of the NHL season. But if I was just betting today, I would take a small piece of McDavid and I would take a small piece of the Oilers. I think that unless Leon Draisaitl goes absolutely nuclear in this series, if it's even just comes down to a coin flip, McDavid is going to get the Conn Smythe. Voters are just going to lean towards the best player. So you can kind of get some good sort of what you call arbitrage or just a more leverage in terms of betting the Oilers by betting McDavid for the Conn Smythe at plus 220 versus plus 110 to win the Stanley Cup. I would definitely split at the very least split your exposure between those two markets, in my opinion, if you like the Oilers. So don't forget about the Conn Smythe Trophy. It's for the best player in the playoffs, not just the finals. McDavid has been the Oilers' best player to date. It's close between him and Draisaitl, but I would certainly still lean McDavid. But yes, right now, I think that the edge would lie with the underdog, even though, like I said, I'm looking at these lines as pretty efficient.
If you like the Oilers in this spot, what do you think is the best way to bet them? So, you mentioned betting on an awards market for individual players. I mean, you could also do Oilers to win the series 4-3. I'm looking at that right now. That's plus 550 at DraftKings. Oilers to win the series 4-2 is plus 475. Yeah. I imagine, as the underdog, if they win this series, they're probably not doing it in 5 games. This probably would be a series that goes 6 or 7. How is it that you think is the most optimal way to bet the Oilers if that is how you lean?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I have written down here. Again, if you're betting the Oilers, it's kind of got to be 6 or 7 games. I mean, I think that the Oilers, if they win this series, I'd be pretty shocked if they won the first 2 games, but they're going to split the first 2 games if they win this series. I mean, if the Oilers lose the first 2 games, even me as the most diehard Edmonton fan is going to find it pretty tough to mount a way or an argument for them to come back. It could happen, but if they split those first 2 games, again, Connor McDavid in a 3-game series, we've seen they took out Dallas, they took out Vancouver, and I think that's going to be Edmonton's goal again in this series. That's their path. Split those first 4 games, get the Florida Panthers in a 3-game high variance series where you have the best player. He can take over a couple games and finish the job. And I think taking the Oilers at -1.5, at plus 190 has a little bit of appeal for sure. Whereas if you get to that 7th game and it doesn't happen, you're still going to get paid off. But I kind of like what you brought up. I like those higher variance ones in this situation. I really do think that, that this series has a very good shot of going to 6 or 7 games. If it doesn't, it's probably because the Panthers just overwhelmed the Oilers in the first 2 games and they get it done in 4 or 5. But I think that the more likely scenario with the upside that the Oilers have in talent, this one goes 6 or 7. So definitely like looking at those longer lines. And certainly if you were interested in playing that market, or you just, there's just not enough upside for you and just playing the Oilers at plus 110, I would definitely be looking towards the 6 or 7 game markets, whether it's just a little bit lower variance approach with the Oilers -1.5, or just taking the series total games to go 6 or 7. You can get plus 200 for 6 games, plus 200 for 7 games in that market, or go the route that you suggested, which is Oilers in 6 or Oilers in 7, and even get bigger odds that way.
Okay. And then let's say if someone did like the Panthers, I know you lean more towards the Oilers in the spot, but if someone were inclined to bet the Panthers, what do you think is the optimal way to do that?
Again, I mean, we're talking about series outcomes here. Like, I think that the Panthers have 2 games at home ice to begin with. They've got a deeper team. I think they have less injury issues. They've got a goalie with less, what I'd call it, maybe a little less upside, but probably a better floor. I think that there's a very good chance they could come out and win the first 2 games. And in that situation, they basically just need to split the 2 games in Edmonton and then come home with the chance to close it out in game 5. I think that the Panthers, again, if you're going to play the Panthers, I wouldn't just take the -130. I don't really like that at all. But certainly there's definitely like a ceiling, a good ceiling with the Panthers here, where they could close this out in 4 or 5 games. I really do think that's a potential possibility of this series. I don't think that's how it's going to go, but if I envision of my head of how the Panthers would come out in this series, that's certainly a way they could do it. And I think just looking here, getting the Panthers at plus 330, -2.5 games on DraftKings, you may even be able to find a better number. But certainly that is like an option I would consider. The Panthers at -1.5 or plus 160. I think that's fine as well. I mean, the Oilers have been good in certain situations at home, but they haven't been shut down. Stuart Skinner's actually been worse at home too. So, if you're getting Florida in a closeout situation in game 6 in Edmonton, I mean, it's not necessarily like a shoo-in that the Oilers win that game. So certainly looking towards the Panthers. If I was playing the Panthers, I would take them to win in 6 or less, and potentially even look at even more upside scenarios where they could close it out in like 5 or less.
All right, let's talk a little bit about game one here. In Florida, the puck line Panthers -1.5, +185 odds there. The total 5.5. And then the money line -135 to the Panthers, +114 to the Oilers. How do you see game one playing out?
Game one is going to be really interesting. Again, I mentioned this off the top. I think this is going to be a great series. And I think we're going to get a little bit more open ice than I think people realize. At least I hope that's what we get. We're getting both teams well rested here. 5+ days. We're getting a big hype. And I feel like in these situations, you may just get a little bit looser play. The defense may not be quite on top of their game. They're not, the Panthers aren't going to be used to the Oilers' speed. The Oilers' defense is necessarily going to have to deal with a little bit more depth than they're used to. And just the way the Oilers play, if they do get a lead, I mean, like we've seen, they just have a tendency to kind of play to the situation, which means they're going to sit back. And if they sit back against the Panthers, I think that'll be more trouble for them than against the Stars. I like the over in this game. I may even look to play like alternate totals for like 8 or 9 goals. I really think you're getting two goalies too, where certainly I think that they're going to have their moments later on in this series. But again, like Bobrovsky hasn't seen Connor McDavid or Draisaitl or any kind of that speed. He's not used to how fast the Oilers move the puck up the ice. I think that could be a shot against them as well, against the goaltenders. So I like the Oilers in game one, +114. I'll play the underdog here. I played the Oilers as underdogs against Dallas. It worked out. If you read my previews, basically I either took the over in that series or I took the Oilers. And my approach to these games is probably going to be pretty similar. I like the Oilers in game one, but I definitely am looking for a little bit more goals. I think that the Oilers will have a chance to get out in front. And I think if that happens, it's really going to put the Panthers in a spot where they're going to have to ramp up, take a few more chances, come in waves. And that could just push this game to like a 5-4 first game. And we've seen that in some of the Oilers series as well. It was tighter against Dallas in game one, but the Oilers and Canucks played a shootout in game one. I think the Oilers and Kings scored like 12 goals in their game one of their series, or 11 goals. So kind of looking for potential scenario there. I think that the Oilers' speed is going to surprise the Panthers a little bit, and hopefully that gives them the edge in game one. But certainly I like the underdog to come out in this series. That's just the way I would lean. There's just a little bit too much kind of X factors going on for me to just necessarily trust that Florida comes out, shuts down the Oilers completely. Bobrovsky plays a clean game. I'm not going to play that at -135. I'd rather take a shot with the Oilers' talent as underdogs.
All right, a couple of thoughts here related to the total there. So you had mentioned you like the over 5.5. That's -118 right now, looking at DraftKings. If you look at the alternative market there, so you bump that number up to 6.5, it's +130 to the over. If you bump it to 7, +220, bump it up to 7.5, +280. Where's the cutoff for you in terms of where you think in the alternate market you would want to bet that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that 7.5 is probably like a good spot if you're playing alternate lines. Again, like you look at just NHL lines in general, they generally tend to fall between 5.5 and 6.5. So, the fact we're getting 5.5 with a little bit of juice towards the over right now, you could play 6.5 certainly. And I think that if you're playing the over, like that's kind of where I would say the majority of and you like this idea that I'm sort of throwing out, I wouldn't really have a problem playing 6.5. I really wouldn't. I mean, I think that again, if we're hitting the over here, there's just so many scenarios where either the Panthers come out, score some quick goals, maybe even chase Skinner in game one or something like that. And then the Oilers are going to have to play catch up and more wide open. And we just know that the Oilers, as a team that gets behind, can open things up so well that, the game could just get to 7 goals so quickly that, in my opinion, that's kind of like, if you're going to play the over, I would rather just play 6.5, to be honest. But I think 7.5 has appeal. As I mentioned, like the Oilers have tended to play a couple game ones already, super wide open. I think we've got 2 offenses here going up against 2 goalies, just that can kind of have their bad moments. So, with all that upside, and some downside with both goalies. I think that 7.5 is still within reach. So I'd really be looking to kind of nail those 6.5 and 7.5 lines. Certainly, you could play bigger if you want, but I don't necessarily know how much bigger you want to go than 7.5. I think that getting the low range of the totals here at 5.5 gives you a good amount of upside at 6 and 7.
All right, you mentioned high scoring game ones, and that does make me think about basketball. With the NBA playoffs going on, it is a long established trend that the longer a series goes, the lower scoring the games tend to get. And I'm wondering if we see something like that in hockey as well, where familiarity just sort of breeds, really tough defense. The longer a series goes, the more fatigued teams tend to be, and the lower scoring we could see these games get. Has there been something like that in hockey?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, pretty much every elimination game that I can recall has pretty much been 5 goals or less. Like the Oilers and Stars being the most recent example, but even the Rangers and Panthers. I believe it ended up 3-2. I can't remember, but it was a low scoring game. It didn't approach the over or get to like 6 or 7 goals. Even the Oilers versus Canucks, the Oilers had a 3-0 lead. It got to 3-2, but I mean, it did. The Canucks needed 2 like sort of late goal rallies just even to get it to 5 goals. Panthers and Bruins played a pretty close series. Like pretty much as the series have gone on, we've seen that. There's been a little bit more examples. There's been a few like outliers where games have gone over, but certainly, this late in the season, even with these teams coming in off rest, again, I'm looking to play the over early on, but it's not something that I would be playing for the whole series. Absolutely. The Oilers have been kind of an over team at home, so that's something else to look for. Potentially if we get like a high scoring game 1 and a low scoring game 2, might look towards the over in game 3, but it's not something I'd want to play to the over deep in the series. It's more of play it for game 1, and then we'll reevaluate in terms of the total going forward. Certainly looking to play those unders, which I probably haven't done enough, to be honest, later in the series, is something that I'll be looking to do in this one.
Yeah, it feels like we could have a setup where you have a really high scoring game 1, and that sort of sets the expectations for the rest
Yeah.
of the series, where maybe after that there's a
Yeah.
little bit of exploitative possibilities for the under for the rest of the series. All right, so we've talked about, or you have talked about a number of bets here. Out of all of the ones you've highlighted, which one do you think, like right now, is your favorite?
So I think that I'm just going to mention one other thing. I mean, we didn't necessarily talk about props or anything yet, but I mean, we did talk about the Conn Smythe Trophy. If you do, let's say you have some Connor McDavid Conn Smythe exposure, or you're getting that. I think the one other market that is kind of interesting to me is most goal scorers, most goals scored in this series. You can get McDavid. Let me just see if I can pull it up here. You can get McDavid around, I think, plus 600 or plus 700, but you can get Leon Draisaitl around plus 550. Yeah, you can get McDavid around plus 600. You can get Draisaitl around plus 550. And I think Draisaitl, as I mentioned, could be a real pivotal player. So I'd be looking to play either McDavid or Draisaitl in the most goals scored market there. That's not necessarily my favorite bet, but I just wanted to bring that up because those are 2 goal props that I'll also be looking to play. I think both those guys are going to have a good series. It's going to be back and forth. So for game by game, I'd also be looking to play those guys in the goal scorer department anytime goal scores. I've mentioned this in my previews, but McDavid going off at like plus 165, plus 175 for an anytime goal, that just deserves to be bet. His shot attempts have gone up. They went way up in the last 4 games against Dallas. I do not see them going down against Florida. I do not see him coming off 5 days of rest and not, potentially getting like 8 or 9 shot attempts. So just look out for those goal props. But yeah, so I mean, looking at favorite bets for the series, though, back to the main question, I would personally just play the Oilers. The Oilers money line just to take the series plus 110 is good. I like splitting that with Connor McDavid in the MVP market as well, plus 220. But I think that the other way you could play the Oilers is Oilers minus 1.5 games, plus 190. Again, I think the Oilers are going to have a really good chance to split these 2 games. in Florida. And if they do that, they're going to have home ice advantage. They're going to potentially turn this into like a 3 or 4 game series, which I think they've been in a great spot. They've already closed out 2 series in that manner. So, you could play the Oilers for more upside at plus 190, but realistically, I kind of just like splitting it here with the Oilers straight up just to win the series, and maybe a little bit of dabble on the Connor McDavid MVP market plus 220. Again, really think McDavid is going to be in a good spot there to potentially just take that, even if it comes down to kind of a coin flip between him and Draisaitl. So kind of 3 different ways to play the Oilers. You could kind of spread your allocation between all 3 ways there. Oilers money line to win the series, I should say. Oilers minus 1.5 games, again, 6 or less games, and then McDavid in the MVP market. I think that, again, if you're looking to play like one unit, I would probably split between those 3, with probably the least going on Oilers minus 1.5, and then the most going towards just the Oilers to win the series.
Yeah, hear you there. So I think that if I were to try to use the information that you have given and then go look in the market and think about what I would want to bet, I would maybe do Oilers win the series 4-2, and you can get that at plus 475. Because I think I prefer that a little bit more to Oilers minus 1.5 plus 190. Because I do think the 6th game is probably the one that I'm circling if I think that the Oilers win this one. And with the enhanced odds of plus 475, that would probably be the way that I would play it. But man, I'm going to have to think about it. Obviously, I don't venture into these hockey streets all that often as a sports bettor, but you make a compelling case, and man, maybe I have this sort of bias of having seen the Oilers just dispatch the Stars, but yeah, I mean, I just look at them and I think they are so awesome, especially on their 2 first lines, that it's not that it's hard to imagine them losing this series, but I can easily imagine them winning this series.
Right. And I think that's the thing with, having Connor McDavid on the team. Like, if you're taking the Panthers or in any shape or form, like, you're basically betting against a team that has not only the best player in hockey, but also like another top 5 player. Right. So you're obviously, kind of playing a little bit of the, betting against just not only high end talent, but betting against some X factors that could certainly come back to bite you. So nothing against the Panthers. Like I said, they have a great team, deep team. We went through the scenarios where I think they could definitely come through and certainly overwhelm the Oilers. But I think that if you're playing the Oilers, I definitely on par with your suggestion of maybe looking to play them just in like a higher end payout way where they just get it done 4-2. Maybe even just like put a small security bet on Oilers 4-3 or something, or for the series to go 7 games. But certainly, as I've also laid out, if I see the Oilers winning this in 6 or 7 games, that's my prediction. And I think that we've given a couple different really good ways to bet that. Not just playing them straight up, which you can do, but probably better upside, probably better long-term value in some of those other alternative markets.
All right, beautiful. Geoff, great stuff and fantastic coverage of hockey throughout the playoffs. Everything has been great in the articles and the newsletter, obviously the bet tracker. So awesome job with the coverage here, and hopefully it continues with the Stanley Cup Finals. All right, that is going to do it for this episode of the Betting Life Show, brought to you by Fantasy Life. Please subscribe to the show as well as the newsletter. Tell your degenerate betting friends. Join the Discord. See all of our bets in the free Fantasy Life bet tracker. And follow us on social media at The Fantasy Grind and Matt F. the Oracle. Thank you, and see you again next episode.